This video is sponsored by Launch Tabletop, a full-scale board game manufacturer with a print-on-demand prototyping service, Launch Lab. Hang on until the end of the video for more information and a discount code. Hello, and it's time for another 10 in my 100 lessons that I've learnt about board game design and the board game industry over 10 years of making games. I'm Adam Porter, I'm a game designer from Wales in the UK. If you like what I do, please subscribe to this channel, share the video and comment. Let me know your lessons you've learnt about game design yourself maybe. And as always, I don't know what exactly we're going to be looking at in the video today. I've written a bunch of different phrases onto cards and I'm going to reveal 10 of them at random. You can see on the screen now exactly what topics we're going to be talking about today, or at least teasers for them, but I'm unaware. That's the magic of editing. So we're going to reveal the first card and see what it says. Knowledge is power. Be an expert. Okay, so I've sort of covered this previously when I said about methodically going through mechanisms, researching them, learning about them. But I think we can broaden it out from there. We've talked about playing lots of games, so that's part of being an expert as well. Making sure that you know all the most common games that are being played right now. Yes, you need to know some of that mass market stuff too, but probably more important is to know about this stuff behind me here. So play lots of games, watch lots of YouTube videos, okay, watch reviewers, and even better than watching reviewers, watch any sort of content about the industry. I really like, for example, watching news. The Dice Tower does a really good news program where they update on upcoming games and things like that. But you can read about that stuff too on the Board Game Geek website, where W. Eric Martin does a news update very frequently on the blog, on that sort of front page of Board Game Geek. You need to know this stuff. Read rule books, learn about the different mechanisms, read books about board game design, listen to podcasts about board game design. You really need to immerse yourself in it and become an expert, because there are a lot of people who are trying to do what you and I are trying to do here. There's a lot of competition out there. So in order to get above that, you need to really understand the industry and design and mechanisms, what's working right now, what's worked in the past, what the current trends are, what the trends have been in the past, what might be coming up in the future. Be an expert. After a few years of doing that, you'll probably know a lot more than a lot of the publishers, because a lot of them will have been coming into the industry over the last 3 or 4 or 5 years. Well, if you've been around for 10 or 15 years, then you're going to know even more than they do, which means that you can roll with the punches and develop. So yeah, be an expert. It makes you versatile. It makes you valuable to publishers and to collaborators. It's a lot of work, but it's well worth putting in the time. Publishers speak in hyperbole. Yeah, this is something which I noticed in the very early days actually, that publishers will sometimes tell you when they've looked at your game that this is the best thing that they've seen at the entire convention. You know, they've been looking at games from other designers. This is the best one they've seen. You're the only designer that they chose to meet with at that convention. Or maybe they look at your design and say, this is the best, most innovative new example of a genre, of this particular genre. I don't know why they do it. I don't know whether they're trying to charm you or whether they're just excited about the product, but inevitably those things don't quite come true. It turns out your game isn't the best thing ever. Maybe it's trying to attract you to sign your contract with them or something like that. But equally, they can go the other way. They could tell you your game is never going to be published. Nobody would ever publish your game. And I found that those things turn out not to be true either. The truth is the publishers are excited, excitable, sometimes tired at these conventions. They don't know everything, and sometimes they think they get a little bit carried away, and that's fine. It's good. We're all excited. We all speak in hyperbole, but take it with a pinch of salt. Whether they're telling you really good stuff or really bad stuff, it's not necessarily true. The purpose of a pitch meeting is to build a relationship. Yeah, I think even more than a pitch meeting being about pitching your game, a pitch meeting is about pitching yourself, making it clear to the publisher that you're somebody that they should want to work with. Part of that is about this thing about being an expert, making sure you know your stuff and demonstrating that. But it's also about being friendly, polite, professional, that thing we talked about in the previous video about treating it as a meeting of equals, not you're going into it as the sort of subservient, lesser party in this arrangement. No, you've got something that they really want. So I think build that relationship as soon as you start to notice in that pitch meeting that maybe they're not interested in your game. Start to get to know the person. Okay, right, move on. Let's not flog a dead horse here. So we stop talking about my game, start talking about the company. What is it that you intend to do over the next couple of years? What sort of things are you currently looking for? Or even just what have you enjoyed at the convention so far? Have you got any recommendations for me to look out for? Get to know them as a person, because you're likely to be meeting this person over and over again over the coming years. Physical prototypes beat tabletop simulator mods. Yeah, physical prototypes I think are way more effective at representing what you're trying to get, the real player experience. I found in 2023, going to Essenspiel, that a lot of publishers were willing to look at tabletop simulator mods, but most of them didn't really want to. Some of them did, some of them would prefer it, having a physical prototype, and I guess that's because they don't want to have to carry it back in their suitcase, they don't want to post it back to you. A tabletop simulator mod, they're very familiar with it and so on. But the majority who said they would play a tabletop simulator mod, really, they would have preferred me to give them a physical prototype there and then, and they said if they enjoyed the mod, they would want me to send them a physical prototype later. It was useful though, going back, I keep talking about this year, and that's because I hadn't been to Essenspiel for about 4 years, where I had no experience with Tabletop Simulator back in 2019 before the pandemic, and I think things have changed a lot. It was useful in that I didn't have enough prototypes. I took maybe 8 prototypes of each game, and for some of my games there were maybe 10 or 12 publishers who were interested in that game. And I didn't have enough prototypes to hand them all out. So for some of those publishers, I had to say to them, I can share a Tabletop Simulator mod with you, or I can share print and play files with you. What would you prefer? And generally they went for the Tabletop Simulator mod. But still, in 2023, physical prototypes win over digital, I'd say pretty much every time. Journal your playtests. Now I journal a fair amount actually at the moment, not just playtests. I have a productivity journal where I write down things like my to-do list, what my goals are for the day, what my primary focus is. I write down my wins for the day and so on, things I can feel good about when I leave my office space at the end of the day. I have a gratitude journal, which is a bit more about mindfulness and things like this. I'm not saying you have to go to these lengths, but I'm getting a lot out of that stuff right now. Journaling playtests is important too though. And you could use a formal journal, like for example, there's the Fail Faster journal, which is very, very good. I personally like to journal in the way that I like to do it, so I just keep a digital journal, just a word processor document on my computer for each individual game that I'm testing, and I record play tests, in terms of I write down when it was, who I played it with, what the scores were, what the winning strategy was, what rule set I was using, and I'll write down the current document title for that particular rule set, because I'll keep all my different rule sets as they adapt over months or years. I'll write down any changes that I think I need, any particular feedback that I received, and so on. And so I'll have a log of all the different play tests that I've done, and I can see how the game has developed over time. It's so valuable. It's a bit time consuming. Of course, you've got to go back after a playtest. Often these playtests are into the evening, so you're then going home and you're writing them up. It's a bit of a discipline to get into, but it's so valuable when you want to look back later and think, well, why did I change that rule again? I'm sure we used to have a rule for that, but we took it out. Why did we take it out? And you're looking back, 30 playtests ago. Well, there you are. You can find it in that document. Think about expansions, but don't design them yet. Yeah, I think the expansions are For most games and most designers, expansions are probably something you think about later. If you spend a lot of time working on expansions before you've even got a game licensed, then you're wasting time that you could be looking at other projects and developing other projects. If you put all your eggs in that one basket, you pile in on a single game and then it doesn't get made, it's all the more disheartening. So certainly, throughout that initial design process, it's worth thinking about, is there scope for expansion? If I was to expand, which sort of areas of the game might I explore? But I wouldn't get into actually doing it yet, because you really want some commitment from a publisher and a degree of success from the game before you invest that time on something that may never happen. So think about it, but don't get into designing expansions at the very early stages. Your prototype must be functional. Beautiful is optional. And I've spoken previously about the fact that if you want to make your prototype pretty, fantastic, go for it. I think if it brings you joy, and it does for me, then I think you should do it, even if that's not the common bit of advice that you'll hear. But I think it's perfectly reasonable not to do it. Your prototype doesn't have to be beautiful. Certainly when you're playtesting it, it would be nice to get it decent looking before you show it to a publisher, although even that isn't absolutely essential. But what is essential is it must be functional. Because if you have scruffy handwriting all over the place, nobody can read what the cards say, it's going to interrupt the entire playtest. If people are constantly asking you, what does this mean? How does this work? Why is it this way? It's just interrupting the whole flow, and you'll never get a feel for whether that game is any fun or not. So even from the earliest stages, I think your prototype should be neat, tidy, playable, with some basic graphic design that makes it at least functional. And I've seen people fall foul of this time and time again. Scribbling on bits of card, bits of paper. Nobody can read what it says. Nobody understands what it's all about. I can't make head or tail of it. And we plow on through that playtest where nobody's having any fun. And the fact that they're having no fun is actually no reflection on the game mechanisms. It's purely a reflection on the way that it's been presented. Don't design to trends. Predict future trends. Yeah, if you design to trends, you're making a big mistake, because trends represent what was going on in publishers' minds 2 or 3 years ago when they were licensing these games. So if a whole host of games come out, roll and write games or polyomino games, then you can guarantee that the following year or the 2 years after that, publishers are going to have moved away from it. They're going to spot that there's an awful lot of those things on the market. We don't want to do any more of it. So if you go in there thinking, right, roll and write games are hot right now, and you start pitching one to a publisher, the truth is you've missed your chance. It's weird that those things all come out at the same time, okay? There seems to be a bit of groupthink among the designers, that everyone's designing the similar sort of things at the same time. But you need to kind of predict, and it's impossible to do, but you need to look ahead a couple of years, because when your game is licensed, it's going to be 2 years or so before it actually hits the market. Occasionally you might manage it in 12 months, but it's pretty rare. 2 or 3 years is more likely. So looking ahead and thinking, what could I see coming back around? Okay, what right now is out of vogue? Like what right now isn't really happening in the industry, isn't really popular right now? Maybe that's the stuff I ought to be pitching, because that's the stuff that nobody else is currently doing, okay? Or if you can think of something that's genuinely new or hasn't been done for many, many years and try and bring it back, I think you stand a better chance than trying to follow something which has become quite tired and saturated in the market. Your first design probably should not be published. Just because you want to design a game, just because you've played a lot of games, doesn't mean that you have enough experience to produce something that's genuinely of a high quality. It might feel great to you, but that's because you haven't yet honed your craft and you haven't yet, got to the point where you can pick out exactly what's wrong with it. So you might feel that you're creating something magnificent, and other playtesters might be telling you that it's great as well. But the likelihood is the first thing you design is going to have all sorts of problems, whether they're mechanical problems, maybe even thematic problems, but certainly problems in terms of their place in the market and so on. Maybe it's complexity, I don't know, all sorts of issues creep in there, and you're not necessarily going to have the skills to recognize it. It's the same as if you're writing novels, the first story you ever write doesn't end up published. The first painting you paint is not going to end up in the Louvre, okay? It's going to end up, as I say, on your mum's fridge, stuck on there with a magnet with your mum telling you how proud she is of you. Your first game design should probably be something that's appreciated by your friends, by your family, but you don't necessarily need to show it further afield. Nothing to stop you trying, but I think the likelihood is your first, second, third designs are not going to get published. It's going to be some way down the line before you hit on that thing which really works and you start to get a real understanding of the industry. I've got probably my first, well, I don't know, my first 5 or 6 designs that sit upstairs in my cupboard, and I do often think, oh, could I turn that into something? Could I go back and, because I loved those games, could I turn them into something that was genuinely marketable? And maybe I could, but it would take significant development. They're not as good as I thought they were at the time, and that's quite a hard lesson to learn. The market is saturated. Add something of value. Yeah, I said in a previous video, there's too many of us, and it's true. There's too many games. There's too many games in practically every genre. Okay, there's loads and loads and loads of games out there. And the shops, they can't work out what to stock. They can't work out what's likely to be a hit. The distributors don't know what to stock and what to pass on to retailers. The publishers don't know which direction to head in to distinguish themselves from everybody else. It's saturated. So if you do the same thing that everybody else is doing, then you've got a problem. Okay, you're going to just sink among all of that noise. And you might be lucky and rise above it, but it's unlikely. The real skill is trying to look at it all and work out what is of value right now. What would be beneficial to a publisher? So they might bite, they might take the bait and run with your game. Or even better, what would be of value to players? And I mean, that's a very broad, intangible thing, isn't it? What's of value to players? And I'm not saying you have to create something genuinely new. It may just be something that hasn't come around for a while. Like we said about future trends, it's not always about, extreme innovation. And I mean, there's so many thousands of games. If you create something genuinely new, it's likely to be something a bit weird with a bit of a barrier to entry. Bringing stuff back around, subverting old mechanisms, combining things in unique ways is really effective way of designing games. But at the forefront of your mind needs to be who your audience is and designing something that's going to matter to them, that they're going to want to buy or they're going to want to play. Okay, so there's another 10, which just leaves 10 to go in my 100 lessons. I hope you're getting something out of this. As I said in a previous video, reflecting on it, I think is really useful for me, trying to hone it down to I say hone it down, I've got 100 of these things. I'm not exactly being concise here, am I? But yeah, really trying to pick out what things are important to me as a designer and what are those lessons that I've learned. Let me know your lessons in the comments and I'll see you for the final 10 in the next video. All the best. Did you know that LaunchLab has a simple user interface with options for keeping things simple or using a professional approach if you're a little more familiar with photo editing and publishing software? So if you're a beginner or a veteran, LaunchLab has options for you, and the team is always on hand to help you out. So visit launchtabletop.com and use the code AdamInWales for a 20% discount on your order.